Blood dripped onto the polished studio floor. Each drop landed with a soft tap that echoed in the cavernous silence of stage 15. Gene Kelly sat motionless on a wooden chair, his hands trembling not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something that had nothing to do with the 47 takes they had just completed. His left ankle was swollen beyond recognition. His right shoulder hung at an unnatural angle, but it was his eyes that told the real story. Hollow, distant, as if staring into an abyss that had suddenly opened beneath his feet. The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m. In 6 hours, he would need to be back on this same stage, ready to perform the same sequence that had just broken something inside him. The question hanging in the stale air was simple. Would Gene Kelly still be a dancer when the sun rose? 6 months earlier, Eugene Curran Kelly had been untouchable, fresh off the triumph of CoverGirl. He had signed with MGM and was preparing for what would become Anchors Away. At 32, he stood at the pinnacle of his craft, a dancer who could act, an actor who moved like liquid mercury, and a choreographer whose vision was reshaping how America saw itself on screen. But success in Hollywood came with a price that few understood until they paid it. Arthur Freed, the producer, had been clear from day one. This wasn't just another musical. This was MGM's answer to the war. To the boys overseas who needed to believe in something beautiful waiting for them at home. Gene wasn't just dancing for entertainment. He was dancing for the soul of a nation at war. The sequence in question was Kelly's own creation. A 12-minute dance number that would see him partnering with a cartoon mouse. It was ambitious beyond anything attempted before, requiring Kelly to dance with perfect precision to an animated character that existed only in his imagination. Every step, every gesture, every moment of joy had to be flawless. Because the animation would be added later, there would be no room for improvisation, no margin for error. For weeks, Kelly had thrown himself into rehearsals with the single-minded intensity that had carried him from Pittsburgh to Broadway to Hollywood. He rehearsed alone in his apartment, counting beats in his sleep, dreaming in choreography. His wife Betsy would find him at 4 a.m., dancing silently in their kitchen, his bare feet tracing patterns on the cold linoleum. She had whispered one morning, "You are going to kill yourself." Watching him practice the same 8-bar phrase for the 100th time, Kelly had smiled, but hadn't stopped dancing. "I am going to make something beautiful," he said. The first signs of trouble appeared during the 3rd week of filming. The sequence demanded a level of athletic precision that pushed even Kelly's extraordinary abilities to their limit. There were tap combinations that required him to land on the same spot with mathematical accuracy. Leap sequences where he had to freeze mid-air for the cartoon mouse to catch him. And a climactic section where he had to convey pure joy while his body screamed in agony. By week 4, Kelly was consuming aspirin like candy. His personal physician, Dr. Matthews, had begun making regular visits to the set, something that hadn't gone unnoticed by studio executives. But Kelly waved off their concerns with the same charm that had won over audiences from coast to coast. "Just need to work out the kinks," he would say, then return to the grueling precision of his craft. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October. The scene required Kelly to perform a complex tap sequence, leap onto a ladder, slide down it while maintaining perfect rhythm, and then land in a specific mark for the animated mouse to high-five him. It was physically impossible. It was also exactly the kind of challenge that had always driven Kelly to greatness. Take 1, Kelly nailed the tap sequence but missed the mark by inches. Take 5, perfect landing, but the timing was off by half a beat. Take 12, the slide down the ladder was flawless, but his ankle buckled on impact. Take 23, everything perfect except for a barely perceptible hesitation in his smile. Director George Sidney began to look worried. The crew, initially energized by watching a master at work, grew quiet and tense. Frank Sinatra, who was starring alongside Kelly, had left hours ago with a simple shake of his head, but Kelly wouldn't stop. Couldn't stop. Each failed take wasn't just a technical error. It was a betrayal of the vision that had consumed him for months. The animated mouse wouldn't exist without his precision. The moment of pure cinematic magic wouldn't exist without his perfection. Take 31. His left ankle gave out completely. Take 38. His shoulder popped audibly as he grabbed the ladder. Take 42. He landed the sequence perfectly, then collapsed. By take 47, something fundamental had shifted. Kelly executed the routine with mechanical precision, but the joy was gone. The spark that made him Gene Kelly had been crushed under the weight of his own impossible standards. When Sydney called cut, Kelly didn't move. He simply sat down in the nearest chair and stared at nothing. The stage cleared quickly. Crew members gathered their equipment with the careful quietness of people escaping a crime scene. Sydney approached Kelly cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Jen, maybe we should leave me alone." Kelly's voice was barely audible. And so they did. 20 minutes after the stage cleared, the heavy studio door creaked open. Gene didn't look up. He knew those footsteps. Slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many broken dreams on Hollywood stages. Louis Meyer stepped into the shadows, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial chaos of cables and lights. The head of MGM rarely visited sets at 4 in the morning. But Gene Kelly wasn't just any star. He was the studio's investment in the future of American cinema. Gene Meyer's voice was softer than Kelly had ever heard it. "If you are here to fire me, just do it." Kelly still hadn't looked up from the blood on his hands. Meyer pulled up another chair, sitting down heavily beside the man who was supposed to be his golden boy. "My father was a tailor in Minsk," he said quietly. "Worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. His fingers bled from the needles, but every night, he would tell me the same thing. Louis, perfection is not about never falling. It is about getting up one more time than you fall." Kelly finally raised his head. Meyer's eyes, usually calculating and cold, held something Kelly had never seen before. Understanding. "You think I don't know what this costs?" Meyer continued. "I have built this studio on the backs of people who give everything. But sometimes, Gene, everything is too much." The two men sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the debris of artistic ambition. "Tomorrow," Meyer said, standing slowly, "we try something different. No more perfect takes, just good ones." He paused at the door. "The mouse will wait for you. Not the other way around." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Kelly alone with a different kind of silence. One that held possibility instead of judgment. For 3 hours, Gene Kelly sat alone on stage 15, bleeding onto the floor of the studio that had promised to make him immortal. The grand piano in the corner was covered with a white sheet, like a corpse. The elaborate set pieces cast long shadows that seemed to mock the ambition that had brought him to this moment. At some point during those dark hours, Kelly began to understand something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The pursuit of perfection wasn't noble. It was a form of violence. Violence against his body, against his relationships, against the very joy that had made him want to dance in the first place. He thought about the boy he had been in Pittsburgh, dancing not because he had to be perfect, but because movement made him feel alive. That boy had never worried about hitting marks or timing beats to the millisecond. That boy had danced because dancing was freedom. Somewhere along the way, freedom had become a prison. The phone rang at 4:15 a.m. Kelly let it ring 7 times before picking up. "June." It was Betsy. "You never came home." Kelly looked down at his hands. His knuckles were scraped raw from gripping the ladder. His wedding ring had left an indentation in his swollen finger. "I am done," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I can't do this anymore. I am not built for this." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Betsy finally spoke, her voice carried a tenderness that cut through Kelly's despair like sunlight. "Come home, Gene. Just come home." The drive home through empty Los Angeles streets took 43 minutes. Kelly drove slowly, his damaged ankle making it difficult to work the pedals smoothly. The city looked different at this hour, stripped of its daytime pretense. Honest in its loneliness, He found Betsy waiting in their kitchen, still in her nightgown, 2 cups of coffee growing cold on the table. She didn't ask about his injuries. She didn't mention the blood on his shirt. Instead, she did something that broke through Kelly's carefully constructed walls more effectively than any words could have. She put on their wedding song, "The Way You Look Tonight," and held out her hand. "I can't," Kelly whispered, looking down at his swollen ankle. "I am broken, then we will sway," she said simply, for 5 minutes, in their small kitchen, with the morning light just beginning to creep through the windows. Gene Kelly danced without precision, without marks to hit or beats to count, without cameras rolling or executives watching. He simply moved with his wife, feeling the music instead of dissecting it, letting his body remember what it felt like to dance for love instead of perfection. When the song ended, Kelly understood something that would guide him through every performance for the rest of his career. The audience didn't need him to be perfect. They needed him to be human. They needed to see that joy could coexist with imperfection, that grace could emerge from vulnerability. "I have to go back," he said softly. Betsy nodded, touching his face gently. "I know, but promise me something, anything," he replied. "Promise me you will remember this feeling, not the pain from tonight. This feeling, right now." Kelly looked into his wife's eyes and saw his reflection, not as MGM's golden boy or Hollywood's dancing machine, but as a man who had found his way back to the reason he started dancing in the first place. "I promise," he said, and meant it. Kelly hung up the phone and looked around the stage one last time. In a few hours, the crew would return. The cameras would roll again. The impossible sequence would still need to be completed. But for the first time in months, Gene Kelly wasn't thinking about the next take. He was thinking about the drive home, about his wife's voice, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the relentless pursuit of an impossible standard. He stood up slowly, his body protesting every movement. Blood had dried on his ankle. His shoulder sent shooting pains down his arm. But he was standing. At 4:32 a.m., Gene Kelly walked out of stage 15. He would return the next morning, as everyone knew he would. The sequence would eventually be completed, though it would take another 2 weeks and a completely different approach. The film would become a classic, launching Kelly into the stratosphere of Hollywood legend. But something had changed in those dark hours. Kelly had looked into the abyss of his own perfectionism and stepped back. He had learned that there was a difference between excellence and obsession, between dedication and destruction. Years later, when young dancers would ask Kelly for advice, he would tell them about discipline and hard work, about the importance of preparation and the beauty of precision. But sometimes, to those he trusted most, he would tell them about the night he almost quit dancing forever. "The moment you stop dancing for joy," he would say, "is the moment you stop being a dancer." No matter how perfect your technique becomes, the blood stains were cleaned from stage 15 before the crew returned. But Gene Kelly carried the memory of that night for the rest of his career, a reminder that even the greatest artists must sometimes save themselves from their own greatness. In the end, Anchors Away became the film that established Kelly as one of Hollywood's immortal stars. The sequence with the animated mouse became legendary, studied by film students and celebrated by critics. But for Gene Kelly, the real triumph wasn't in the perfection he achieved on screen. It was in the imperfect courage it took to walk away from that chair at 4:32 a.m., choosing life over legend, and finding his way back to the joy that had made him a dancer in the first place. The boy from Pittsburgh had survived Hollywood. That, perhaps, was the greatest performance of all.